Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats and dogs, and freaks of nature of all ages. My name is Brian Bad Hippie Jackson, and welcome to my YouTube. And welcome back to Let's Build Treasures of the Dead in UDK. Now, this is not a Treasures of the Dead map. As you can see, what I did was I took my Treasures of the Dead base map, and there's where my lights and my first person or my top-down camera and stuff are over there. But I've moved my player character up here, and I've got him looking straight at this pole. And so the first thing I'm going to touch on is how to rotate the camera or the player around the Z axis so that he's looking in the direction he needs to go. So you select the player start and you hit F4. F4 will bring up the properties of just about anything in UDK. There's only a few things that F4 will not bring up the properties on. So instead of having to right click on the object or the actor and then go up to player properties or object properties, you just hit F4 and it brings up your properties. Now as you can see, we've got the yaw set to 180. Let's zoom in on this player real quick, and you'll see that there's a little blue arrow right there. That indicates which direction it's facing, which is which direction it'll be looking when it starts. And if I set that to 0 and hit enter, we can see that now the arrow is facing north because he's back to the default. So to rotate something around the Z axis, the blue axis, you use the yaw. So we set that to 180, hit enter, and now he's looking in the direction we want. The roll is moving side to side like an airplane when it rolls, so that will rotate around the X axis, and then the pitch is up and down, facing it up and down, and will rotate around the Y axis. And that's the difference between roll, pitch, and yaw. Roll rotates around the X axis, pitch rotates around the Y axis, and yaw rotates around the Z axis. Okay, so we got that guy facing the way we want him. Now the other things we brought in for this, besides building our little tower and our rappelling rope and stuff, is we brought in a camera. Now the way you get a camera, and I think I went over this when we set up the basic player startup, but we're going to go ahead and do it again, is generally to bring something in, you can just right click and go to add actor or add recent. But if you go to add actor, there is no camera anywhere. There's a lot of things that's just not in the default add actor. So to get a camera in, we open our content browser, we go to actor classes, and I'm going to close uncategorized. I was using that for something else. And right at the top, the first thing under common is camera actor. So you select camera actor, you right click, and then you add camera actor here. Now since we already have one in and we don't need that one, I'm going to delete this, and Control X will get rid of it. Okay, we've also brought in a trigger, and to get a trigger you just right click, go to add actor, and add trigger, and it'll bring in a new trigger. Control X and get rid of that one. And then what we've done with this trigger is, if I hit F4 for the properties, we've simply sized it up to 48 from 40 because we want it right around our pole, so that when we get close enough to the pole we can get our prompt to tell us press E to repel, and then have it use it when we press E we can repel, and that just kind of flushes up nice against the edge and surrounds our pole well, so 48 is a good size there. The other thing we brought in that we're going to be using is a note. To get a note into the level, you bring up your content browser, you go to actor classes, you drop open uncategorized, and right there is your note. And then you simply right click and add note here. Now if you're using the note for what we're using it for, which is a teleport, then you have to grab that note and pull it out of the ground. If it's in the ground, then it will not teleport your actor. It's got to be out of the ground for your actor to teleport to that note. And the only thing we're using it for is a destination. And once again, on this note, let's go ahead and click that and then click the Go to Actor arrow. We'll notice that the arrow is pointing away from the wall, because when we do our teleport, we're going to make sure that adjust rotation is on, and when he comes down to the bottom, we don't want him to be looking at the wall. When he gets to the bottom, we want him to be looking away from the wall. So F4, and I have the yaw set to 180 so that it's looking away from the wall. Alright, so the next thing we're going to need is, I've already built one, is a damage volume. And I created a dynamic physics volume. We're going to hit F4 to bring up the properties. And it does 100 points of fall damage, so that if you fall off, it will kill you. Now I don't have this one enabled. We're going to enable it in Kismet. So let me go ahead and just hit play real quick and show you what happens when we walk off. And just to make sure, this is a pretty tall tower, and if you fell off this thing, it would do more than like 15 points of damage to you. It would really mess you up. But default UDK, you're basically using either robots or the Iron Guard, which is what we've got in as our default character. And I did that in a later video that I haven't published yet. But so the Iron Guard is heavily armored, and of course robots are robots, so they can take more damage than normal peoples can. So that's why we're adding that damage volume there, is so if you go off the edge without repelling, it will kill you. And I'm going to go ahead and grab our red builder brush and show you how to make a dynamic physics volume that will do damage. So we're just going to go ahead and leave the builder brush at the normal size. We don't really need to do anything else weird to it. We're going to right click on add volume. You just go to volumes, take the right one, add volume, right click, and go to dynamic physics volume. And we're going to move the builder brush out of the way, and we're going to select that physics volume. We're going to hit F4, and by default the physics volume is enabled. We're going to leave this one enabled, but we need to go down to pain causing and click that on so that it will hurt us. We're going to take our damage type and do it to fell, because the one we're making now is fall damage. We're falling, and when we hit it we want it to kill us like we fell off of something. And the damage per second, we're going to set that to 100 so that as soon as we hit that volume it will kill us. Now we're just going to go ahead and back up a little bit. We're going to right click, we're going to play from here, and we're going to walk straight into that damage volume. And we're dead. And that's the way you create a damage volume using a dynamic physics volume. And there's all kinds of different damage you can do. We've got crossbow damage, crush damage, fall damage, suicide damage. Any kind of weapon you have, it'll have that kind of damage. There's fire damage, drowning damage, lava, all kinds of stuff. So you can really customize what kind of damage your volume does. So that it looks better. But we're going to get rid of that one because we don't need it. So Control X, and we've got this one there, and we're going to use it, and we're going to activate it as soon as the player starts. Okay, so let's go ahead and pop open our Kismet, and I'm going to go over a few things that I didn't go over in upcoming videos. I've already got a lot of videos recorded, but when I was editing them I realized that there were things about Kismet and Matinee that I just did not explain properly, or I did not explain at all, and I need to explain those things. So First thing I didn't touch on is moving stuff in Kismet. If you just left click and drag, it's going to pan your window, which makes it look like you're moving everything. You're not actually moving these, you're panning the window. If I select, let's say, my lights, which I don't have active, but let's say the lights, and I left click and drag, it's still going to pan the window. To move individual things within Kismet, I have to hold Control. Then I can left click and move something individually. Also, we're going to get into the way Kismet is basically set up and works. It operates off of two primary things: actions and events. Actions are something that happens to the player, whether it's a teleport, whether it's damage, anything like that. Attaching something to the actor, destroying the actor, modifying the health, those are all actions. But before an action can happen, they have to be fired off by an event. So the event is something that happens within the game, such as touching a trigger or using a trigger, and then that event will cause the action to happen. So we want to make sure that this damage volume activates as soon as the player starts. So we're going to right click, we're going to go to New Event, we're going to go to Player and select Player Spawned. And then in Player Spawned, down in the Sequence Events, we're going to change our max trigger count from 1 to 0, because the trigger count on every trigger by default is 1, which means it's a one-use trigger. You use it one time, then it destroys itself, and when the player respawns, whatever that trigger is supposed to activate won't activate because the trigger is no longer active. Well, we want to make sure that if we fall off this tower and kill ourselves, when we respawn back at the top, it's going to activate that damage zone again. So we're going to change the max trigger count to 0, because 0 is default for infinite. Now with that damage volume selected, we are going to right click and create a new object variable using dynamic physics volume 1. Okay? So our event, which is going to fire off our action, is the player spawned. The action we want to do is to activate that damage zone. So we're going to right click, go to New Action, we're going to select Toggle and do a regular toggle, and we're going to plug the out of the player spawned to turn on in the toggle. For the target, which tells us what are we turning on, we're going to connect that to the dynamic physics volume variable. And now we've got it set up so that if we play and we don't rappel down the rope, that volume will kill us. And that's exactly what we want. Now I'm going to grab the physics volume and the toggle, and I'm going to move them underneath the player spawned so I can make room for other stuff over here. Alright, so now we've got our physics volume active. Now the next thing we want to do is set up our trigger. So we're going to select our trigger, we're going to right click, we're going to go to New Event using trigger volume 0, and we're going to select Touched. Because what we want to happen is when we touch that trigger, that's the event, the action we want to happen, we're going to go to New Action, Voice Announcements, and Play Announcement, is we want it to give us instructions. Once again, we're going to take that trigger touch and we're going to set the max trigger count to 0 so that if we get killed and respawned, we can touch it more than once and it will play that announcement. And that announcement is going to give us our instructions on how to rappel down the wall. So we're going to type in press E to rappel. So now when we touch that trigger, it'll tell us how to rappel. Now we're going to right click and we're going to go to New Event using trigger 0. We're going to go to the bottom and we're going to select Used. Now the first thing we want to do in this Used trigger is take that Aim to Interact and turn it off. Okay? Because if the Aim to Interact is turned on, you pretty much have to be looking dead center of the trigger to work it. Now that works really well for things like doorknobs or light switches when you need to look at the doorknob or look at the light switch to turn it on or open it. But for something like this, we don't want to have to look at the trigger. We just want to be able to touch the trigger, it give us our instructions, and then we can hit E, and E is the default Interact or Use button, so we don't even need to change that, and be able to use it without aiming. We're also going to go down and change our max trigger count to 0. Now, the first thing that's going to happen when we touch that trigger is we're going to run that over and turn off the damage zone, so that when we rappel down the wall and get to the bottom, that damage zone is not going to kill us. And even if we teleport outside of the damage zone at the end of it, if we turn around and walk back into it, it's still not going to kill us. So we've got that Use trigger done. And if we press play, we see we have press E to repel. We press E. Of course, we're not going to repel because we don't have the animation set up yet. But if we go over the edge, that trigger, that damage zone isn't going to kill us. It's been toggled off. Alright, now we need to set up our Matinee. So we're going to right click and create a new Matinee. Move that over just a tad. Remember, hold Control to move things individually. Now we're going to select our camera, and then we're going to do a little bit of a trick I'm going to show you here, and it makes it a little bit easier to do things like a first-person camera to animate it. We're going to move that in to right to where we can, right about there, and then we're going to go up here to this little eyeball, which is, let's minimize that down, which is Lock Selected Actors to Camera. Okay, so if I press that eyeball, my camera is still selected, but it goes wherever I move my camera. So if I'm up in here, you can see down there. Let's go ahead and put all these on real time as well. Just get everything set to real time. I move back and forth, and you can see my camera is moving to where I'm moving. So I want the first camera angle to be right about here. Let's pop open our Kismet, double click our Matinee to open that up. So with our camera selected, we're going to right click, add new empty group, and we're going to call this FPS_cam, our first person camera. Now we're going to right click in first person cam, and we're going to add a new movement track. Now this is going to take somewhere in the neighborhood of 7 to 10 seconds. So we're just going to go ahead and grab this red doodaddy, and we're going to move it out to about 10. And then we're going to grab this green doodaddy, and we're going to move it out to about 10, just in case we need the full 10 seconds. Now as we can see, our first keyframe is automatically tagged in, and that is automatically tagged in with where we are right now. Alright, so we're going to take our slider and we're going to move it to about 2 seconds. Actually, let's go about 1.5 seconds. 1.5 will work. And we don't have to be exact, we just need to be really close. Now, with movement selected, we're going to hit Enter, and that's going to create a new keyframe. Then we're going to right click on that keyframe and go to Set Time, and then type in 1.5 so we know we're at 1.5 seconds even. Now you have to set your keyframe before you move your actor. So now that we've got that keyframe set, we can move this actor out and around, make him look up. Let's move him to the side just a tad, and we're going to make him look up, and now he's in a position where he has grabbed that rope. And if we look at this here, we can see where our camera is. Okay, so now we're going to move this one to about 3. We're going to hit enter. We're going to right click, set time, and make sure we're on 3. And we're just going to pull our actor down the wall a little bit. There we go, and we're going to make him look to the side just a tad. Now we're going to go to about 5. Hit enter, set time, 5, pull him further down the wall and make him look to the other direction and down a tad, just because it adds a little bit of variety. Now we're going to go to about 7, hit enter, set time, 7, and we're going to pull it down almost to the ground and have him looking pretty much straight at the rope. There we go. Now we're going to go to about 7.5, hit enter, set time, or 8.5, 8.5, and we're going to move him the rest of the way down the rope, and we're going to have him start to turn like he's looking, and then we're going to go to 10, hit enter, set time, 10, and we're going to turn him so he's looking straight towards that note, and we're going to move him forward just a little bit, and that will be the end of the animation. Now, that animation is not going to give us the camera view. It will just allow us to see that camera movement. So if we hit stop and go back to the beginning, we can play and we can see what our camera's doing. And we did a big old spinny up the top there, and I don't know why, but it was actually kind of groovy, so we'll leave it. It was a mistake, but we'll leave it. I don't know why he spun around that many times. There we go. Now, to get the Matinee to actually give us the camera view, we're going to leave that camera selected. We're going to go back to 0. We're going to right click, and we're going to add a new director group. Now, in that director group, on the first keyframe, right there, we're going to select that director group. We're going to hit enter, and this is going to give us a new cut. And it'll give us the option to cut to the director group or to any other object that we have in the Matinee. So we're going to cut to FPS cam, click OK, and that's going to give us our cam shot. And so now, let's go ahead and minimize our Kismet, and let's make that small enough that we can see the first person window. If we hit play, we spin around the pole, we rappel down, and then we end right there. Now, we're going to close this real quick because we can't test play with it open. Now, the only problem with that is we start out here, We hit E to repel. Why is it not? Oh, I probably didn't hook something up. Let's open our Kismet. Yep, I got to hook it up to player. It won't work. There we go. We hit E to repel, and we're going to spin around, and then we're going to repel down. And then we're right back at the top. So there's a couple of more things that we need to do to make this completely functional. So the first thing we're going to need to do is create something to keep us from screwing our player up. Because even though the matinee is playing, we can still move our character while the matinee is playing. And we don't want to be able to do that, because if we do, there's a good chance we're going to walk off the edge and it's going to mess things up for us. So we're going to right click, we're going to go to new action, we're going to go to toggle, and we're going to toggle cinematic mode. Okay? And we're also going to need a player variable for this, so we're going to hold P, left click, we're going to take that all players and turn it off so it's just a player 0, and then we're going to run the target from toggle cinematic to the player. And on trigger used, we're going to enable this toggle cinematic. Now what this toggle cinematic does is it allows us to hide and disable things that the player would normally do. We're going to leave everything checked. So we're going to disable movement, disable turning, we're going to hide the player, we're going to disable input, we're going to hide the HUD, and we're going to hide any dead bodies or drop pickups. Because if we've already fallen off the tower once and respawned, then there's a good chance that our guns or our body is still going to be at the bottom, so we're going to hide those. Okay? Now when the matinee is completed, we want to be able to continue to move. So we're going to take the completed and run that into the disable toggle cinematic, and that will end the toggle cinematic. Now the last thing we're going to do is make sure that when we get to the bottom, we stay at the bottom. So we're going to select that note, and we're going to turn that off. I forgot I had the lock selected actor to camera. We're going to select that note, we're going to right click, and we're going to create a new object variable using note 0. We're also going to need this player to be over here, closer to the note, so let's go ahead and put that there. And now we're going to right click, new action, actor, and we're going to go all the way down to the bottom and select teleport. Now the target is going to be the player, because the player is what we're wanting to teleport. The destination is going to be the note, because we want to teleport to the note. And in teleport, we're going to update rotation so that when the player teleports to that note, it is looking in the same direction that the note is pointing. So we're going to leave update rotation turned on, and then we're going to run the completed from the matinee to the end of the teleport. So what this does is when the player spawns, it toggles the damage zone, the dynamic physics volume, the damage zone on, so that if we go over the edge without repelling, it'll kill us. When we touch the trigger, it'll tell us how to repel. When we press the E button, it will turn the damage zone off and play the matinee of us repelling. It will also enable the cinematic mode so that we can't move the actual player and accidentally mess ourselves up. And then when the matinee completes, it will disable the cinematic mode so we can move again, and it will teleport the player to the note so that we're no longer standing at the top, we're actually at the bottom. So let's go ahead and rebuild our paths to make sure everything works right. Let's click play and test it out. So the first thing we're going to do is not touch anything, and we're just going to go over the edge and make sure that that damage zone will kill us. And we are dead. So that works fine. We're going to respawn back at the top. press E to repel. We press E, get our little spinny thing going. That was a mistake, and I don't know how it happened, but it's all good. We repel down to the bottom. We turn around, look out, and there we are at the bottom of our tower. I want to do that one more time just because it's cool. And there we go. And that is the best I know how to do to give you guys the basics of Kismet and Matinee. So we learned that in Kismet, to move things, to pan the whole window, you just left click and drag. To move individual objects within that window, you hold Control and drag. We learned that the two primary things are events and actions, and we need an event to occur to fire off an action. Events are things like player spawned, trigger touched, trigger used, and then actions are things like toggle, play announcement, cinematic mode, teleport, and we learn that we need variables to tell our actions what they're targeting, what they're activating, deactivating, teleporting, and things like that. Now, there are two ways to select multiple things. I don't remember if I said this or not, so I'm going to. You can either select something and then hold Control and select something else, and then you can move them all, or you can hold Control and Alt and then drag out a box around everything you want selected. So we're going to drag a box around that, and we're going to create a new sequence just like we have with that player startup. We're going to go to the inside of any one of these, it doesn't matter, right click, create new sequence, and we're going to call this repel underscore anim for animation. Click OK, and now we have a new sequence. So now all of our player startup is sequenced, so it's nice and neat and easy to find, and we know what does what. And we have our repel animation in its own sequence, so that everything is nice and neat and easy to find, and we know what does what and where and how, because once we start getting into a larger amount of Kismet within a level, if we don't have those sequences, things are going to get really screwy really fast, and it's going to make it really hard to debug. So one more time, just because it's fun. And there we go. So we learned how to work with our Kismet, and we learned the basics of working with our Matinee, and we learned how to do a camera switch, because we are to do that camera switch so that it follows a camera, because we're going to be using that quite a bit in Treasures of the Dead when we hit door switches and things like that that activate doors that aren't close to us. We'll use that camera switch so that we can see what door we just activated and know what just opened, right? And that's it for the basics and the introduction into Kismet and Matinee and animating with Kismet and Matinee. Please do not forget to check the links in the description below for the Disabled American Veterans and the Wounded Warriors Project. Let's please help support our veterans. If you liked the video, then hit the like button, subscribe, and share. Tell your friends and family to hit the like button, subscribe, and share. Please don't forget to leave me a comment. They are always welcome, good, bad, or somewhere in between. Thank you very much for watching. I greatly appreciate your support. I greatly appreciate your time. I love you all. I couldn't do this without you. Thank you very much. And until next time, this is Brian Bad Hippie Jackson saying peace, love, clean underwear, and happy gaming.